So what's happening is that there is something that unites us all, okay? And this is
Right.
from the black man, all of the white man, to the white woman, to the black woman, to the Chinese woman, to every single species that lives on the earth, even the animals, okay?
Right.
And and this being or this story or just this world intense that unites us was actually the ancient tradition that everyone was on from Ireland all the way to West Africa before the pole shift, okay?
Okay.
And then the pole shift is very easy to understand like this. If everyone is, let's say, in understanding of the mother, okay, which is
Right.
really water, and they are tuned in with that, that's the lifestyle that everyone is living, everything is centered around that. What a pole shift causes is that all of a sudden, over a short gradual period, everyone will be tuned into the sun all of a sudden. So that so in a sense, the mother is the foundational teachings and happenings and things that we go through first. And then when there's a pole shift, it's deemed, okay, it's enough water for them. Now it's time for some fire. Let's bring in the sun. And then what happens is all the belief systems and the traditions and things, they all change. And that's how these societies work, is they basically go in successions of fire and water, fire and water. And what we're calling ancestors and what we're calling ancients are really the energies that are associated with bringing about these transformations. But they're not impersonal, meaning that these beings are more alive than we are even, because they contain more of the genetics, more of the DNA, and more of everything that makes us us that we still don't even really understand yet, okay?
Okay.
So I can only begin this story with from the ancient Nomo traditions, the ancient Irish traditions, ancient Norse tradition. So in every single ancient tradition, you'll see them mention first the arrival in this world of arrival of a being that was known as the twin. Okay, and this
Okay.
became to the Nomo, to the Dogon, the Nomo.
Okay.
And that this particular being was known to be androgen because androgyny in the physical reality is the sign of immortality. Okay, so just as everything happens on another level before it actually happens here, when it does happen here, it is basically a reflection of what was something else much further into other spheres. That makes sense to you, correct?
That makes sense. Yes.
So in a sense of instead of looking at it directly like, okay, hermaphrodite, maybe someone homosexual, maybe someone's a dyke, that's just too much brain job. Just look at it as the conversion of a being that is immortal on another plane. If they did appear in physicality, they would be androgynous. And the reason is because it's a statement saying that I don't need to go anywhere to reproduce myself. I don't need to go to anyone to reproduce myself. I can reproduce from myself. I am
Right.
immortal. And that's what you find in the ancient tradition, especially the Kemetan traditions, where they call them self-propelled beings. I like the term, but it means a being that basically can turn itself on, that can keep, regenerating itself. Okay, and this is also known as being parthogenic.
Right.
So this parthogenic being, also known, we'll just call it as the Nomo, which was a symbol for water, contained all of the DNA that we're looking at here on the planetary system. And so that also made its form quite strange because it was like really a composite being. It had the DNA, or actually it's easier for me to explain the characteristics. The characteristics was generally, because the male and female was in the same body, generally it was depicted that the head was also on the same body, which would be quite disturbing to look at for the concepts that we're into today. In addition, that the bottom half of this being, the reason why it was scaly, fish-like, or serpent-like, which this being later on became known as the rainbow serpent, is
Okay.
because it had a prehistory in the netherworld or in the ocean. Okay?
Okay.
And then the actual evolution process, meaning the next stage that's to come about, that this being was fused with the previous stage and the next stage. Now, all of what I just mentioned to you is not odd because you will find a lot of beings on this planet now that are actually in between their phases of evolution or to their next level, right?
Right.
And in addition to that, to have two beings in one body is not odd either, because we're doing it now. And it's important to understand that this being, the Nomo, had achieved some level of balance within keeping both beings in the same body. But the being that it actually created did not, however, be able to achieve this balance and was actually primarily female. So first we have the Nomo, and then we have the first generation from the Nomo known as Leb, which is a female lioness. That this female lion, as far as an archetype is concerned, now this female
Right.
lioness was androgyne, so could generate from itself, but was primarily female. And that's what the secret of the Sphinx is. That's what they're showing in Avatar in a very slick way. That's what the Rastafari is about. That's also what Britain is about, because at this point, when the ancestors, and they call this the second word, when
Okay.
these beings start being created, there becomes more of them, and this is what we call the ancestors. Like there's basically several of these lioness or wombs, and this became known as the seven sisters of the Pleiades. These lioness also had a cow-like zoomorphication, meaning that they also were symbolized by the cow and the cow goddess. So it looks to me as that when I see all the symbolism, because there was also a frog goddess, that anything that really reproduced, that these beings encompassed it. And what the animals really were are like the interpretation of that on the physical plane. So it's easier to look at the animals for their traits and their characteristics and then gain loads about what's going on with the ancestors, rather than looking at the animal as if it is the ancestor, because that'd be just like looking at yourself and imagining that what you're seeing in the mirror is the Overmind and the whole massive state of consciousness, etc. That's not what you're seeing in the mirror.
Right.
So the next stage that happens here is very interesting, because what you find is that this androgynous being that's primarily female is the mother of all the species that live on the planet. And this being was known to be, because of what happened with us, the only cure for us to get us back to the stage that we should be in. And let me explain that. Because this being, known as Leb, is also Sophia.
Okay.
All these traditions are all the same. And what Sophia did is she created this being, which is given the term the jackal, which becomes the composite even for the new human body. But she creates this being from a word. Okay?
Okay.
And in ancient traditions, what is shown is really a flute, okay? Unlocking the mystery that what the Kemetans were doing, and what even in Indus Valley, what they knew about the tones and the vibrations, that a tone and a vibration can bring a being into life, okay?
Okay.
Now, the way that this being is brought to life then is very different than the way that the Nomo bring beings into life. Like when the Nomo brought Leb, the female lioness / goddess, meaning even the Starbucks symbol kind of shows her. She's a mermaid in a sense.
Right.
When they brought forth that being, it was already coming from beings who already knew how to create. So let's take a pause here and let me explain a little bit to you more about the Nomo. Now,
Okay.
the Nomo, they're responsible for populating the kind of worlds that you're in right now. And how they do that is they have several ships, but they're all moons. Okay? And this becomes very simple. This is why a lot of people were saying, oh, the moon is an artificial satellite, it's hollow, it's not real, whatever. And it's because the knowledge, and obviously they're still clueless to what's going on, but the knowledge shows from the ancient traditions that the Nomos craft, the crafts that they always used, were these moons. And because they were so advanced and their objective, they didn't play around, was to create life, to make, that was very serious to them, to make sure life kept going. So they would ride one of these moons into planets that were ready to be developed. And then that moon, being encased with all of the things that are necessary for a planet to begin to its generation process, would serve to be the main component to cause generation. Okay? So notice how, so all the DNA, all the encodings, the language, the programming that makes like a snail come out during the day but not or out at night but not during the day, or at dawn but not in the middle of the day, so it gets just burned up. The thing that makes a dolphin come out of the water, or a whale come out of the water, take a breath. All the beings that are not functioning on what we have, which is we can control many of our senses. Actually, we can control all of them if you get to that stage. But animals can't. So they're on some, in a sense, overmind is what I call it. The overmind. Now, what the overmind is on this ship, and this gets into Dr. York's teaching. This is a blend of everyone's teaching because everyone was getting a piece of it, but they didn't understand completely what the transcription was. It took the Dogon master 30 years to figure out his own custom. So imagine somebody else trying to come in and try to figure this whole thing out. So this craft on board of it, on the board was a database, which you can call this technology in a sense, but on a way futuristic level, of what's called an overmind. And what an overmind does is it's what gives out those signals and those instincts of what you're supposed to do to basically keep reproducing until you learn how to do that yourself. Okay? And so this is why when this particular craft fell into the hands of what we're perceiving as the darker forces, they had control over the planet because they had control over a craft that has an overmind on it. So do you see how like one thing is kind of leading to another here? So just to let you understand, I have to introduce the third character, which was the birth of what Leb created, which was known as the jackal. Now let me give you all of the jackal's names. The jackal's name is Ja or Yao. The jackal is a lion and a snake because his mother is a lion and a snake. Okay, so remember, she's a lioness and she has a fish body. So what is her son gonna have? He's gonna have the same characteristics, but so when you see the cognate of what they call Yaldabaoth, which is Sophia's son, he's a lion snake. Now, his confusion is one. First, he was created, or it was created. Now, just to understand, so you understand its sexual gender, it is also hermaphroditic. It also has both, it can generate male and female, but it is primarily male.
Okay.
You see, so this is very important for you to understand in all your research and your studies and your introspections, because you are also male and female, but primarily female. So this is not odd for beings to kind of be more polarized towards one area, but still contain both poles.
Right.
So this being known as the jackal, Yah, Jah, Jehovah, etc., actually was very confused because the first thing is because it was created by a word, it didn't know where it came from. Now, the most interesting thing about this being is that all these beings is I'm talking about something that's inside of you. I'm not talking about necessarily something that's running around the planet with ships and all that, even though they probably are doing that too, but more so that all these beings are inside of you and they need to be reunited. That's the good part of the story. There is a good end to the story. And then the beginning comes that's like never before. But what happens is just I need to explain to you the characteristics of these beings and why they are so different from each other. Because this will give you all of the archetypes that ever exist on any kind of planetary system, and it allows you to bring them all together. So continuing on the story of the Jiao, is that basically the being is confused because it doesn't know where it came from. Now, this story is very, very close to what is going on Earth right now. Human beings are born, they don't know where they really came from, so they're extremely confused. That's why every time we were trying to say, well, where did we come, since nothing comes from nowhere, then, you know, what are we talking about here? If there was nothing in the beginning, then where did everything come from? And this kind of confusion is what the jackal was full of in the mind. Okay, so right off the bat, the being is created in full sentience, but is confused about where it even came from. The second thing is that because it's created from a word, a tone, a vibration, and this gets you into those words that, like Isis took the word from Ra and these words that create things. Because it was created from a word, it also did not have a direct connection to the nature that was here. Because the nature that was here was created by the Nomo and Leb. And those beings are on another consciousness level, right? They do telepathic, okay?
Right.
Now, the reason why they also denote that this being was created by a word is that's also what it was the master of, words, because Yah is also Thoth. It's the dog-faced god Hermes. It's Anu. It's Anubis. Trust me, this being is in every culture that there's a religion, it has set itself up as God
Okay.
because its attitude is that of a being that does not have a connection to nature because it doesn't have that telepathic sense that was endowed within its parents. And so it had attempted to create that telepathic sense through what we're calling technology over time, that it can try to discover and read in what's going on in nature, not just by like, see, the humans are in a very unique point because they're mixed with all the beings. But the jackal by itself, or that frequency by itself, it can't tap into nature. So it's got to find other ways to tap into nature. Do you see what I mean? So,
Exactly.
understanding this being a little bit more is that it was furious because it's got an immense level of power because of its mother and her composite and her makeup, but it's also extremely confused. Isn't that the recipe for the wrong type of situation?
Yes.
So, in this confusion, because this being did not know it had been created, it assumed that it was the creator. It's kind of what happens next when you're in this state of mind. And that's why it kind of set itself up as the God over everything: animals, beasts of the field, creeping things, anything that moveth is under its dominion, it claimed, and that it is the king, which is what Anu means. Okay?
Okay.
So it's going through this process. And one of the key points here is that the being gets so frustrated because everything that is around it is really still in its childlike stage. So it's the king because there's nothing smarter. Do you understand? Or
Right.
smarter in that tense of being conscious like that. Because this being is
Right.
created from a word. Now it's fully conscious. It knows words. It can see partially into the future. So it's got all that going on. So this is what happens. It decides that it's going to steal a Nomos ship. And I'm not sure the complete objective after that because I'm getting the rest of the story and the rest of the transmission, but I'm assuming that the objective was to go and create its own world or maybe go and explore. Who knows? Okay. But after it had subdued the earth and there was no more fun here, it was trapped. So it devised a scheme to steal a ship. And I'm going to just have to jump to the future because all of the processes that happen in between that get to the point of it even knowing how that there are ships, and that's all of what you're seeing in the Sumerian texts. That's all of what you're seeing throughout these cultures about this back and forth battle of basically humans being used to mine. Like they're
Okay.
to find information and to build certain structures and all these kind of things. Because the other thing about this being is that it's also known as the smith. It's known as the hammer of the witches, meaning what the witches are using to to make their power even work. Just so you understand, this being is known as the horn one, or the one that also was Moloch and MLK, or Molech, which was in Ethiopia. So in every tradition, you'll find this being. It was always there sitting on a throne because it was not very overt as it is today about what it wants to accomplish. Okay, because there's an evolution taking place here anyway. Even this being is evolving, and let me explain that to you. The jackal is basically a cognate of a black dog. And the reason is because dogs are really lions. They just are degenerated lions. Okay, that's why Snoop Dogg changed his name to Snoop Lion,
Snoop
because he's
Lion.
trying to say, I'm regenerating, I'm going back up to the next level, because they give them a little bit of this knowledge. Plus, it's also in the ether. So you start, if you are, you are. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, Rick Ross, running around barking like a dog, it's not odd because it's a whole Anubian culture. Okay, so using basically the jackal and the power of the jackal, which is Anubis, to bring one back into life. And this is why you see Anubis there, and he's supposed to be the one who's handling how the reincarnation is going to take place. And it's because that's what happened, that the mother tradition, which the mother was the one who handles the reincarnation. She was the savior of the entire world. She was the one that contained all the DNA. It was only by going through her that you could perfect your DNA and then go to a completely different level. While if you dealt with the jackal, he was going to screw up your DNA even more. And then after that, you were going to be kind of stuck on the planet like he is. You see what I mean? But again, there's a good story at the end of this, because the good end of the story, which I'll tell now, is that in order for this world to be perfected, all these three beings unite. The jackal, who's very, very malevolent at this point, his mother, which is the only one that can really, really expressed to him that he did come from something. And the Nomo, who is alien, who really ejected all of these beings from its world initially because they could not live there. So meaning that the Nomo don't allow beings like Leb, who goes into physical reproduction, definitely not the jackal, to live on their worlds, because the consciousness that those beings are in don't even blend in with that kind of world. Do you see what I mean?
Okay.
So this is really a growth process, and I know it's a lot to kind of ingest at once, but it actually starts getting easier over time. And obviously the more that we talk about this and the more that I explain it, because I have all the documentation not only, and I also have the images and things, but I also have the story within myself, which is that every single entity that you're talking about, the Nomo, the mother, Leb, and the jackal, I have inside of me. And I've been watching these three characters all my life. For like 15 years, I've been watching these three characters. And because the alien state of consciousness is when everything that you're doing is foreign. So you don't even feel like this is even you anymore, or was ever you, and that there's got to be something else, but you just don't understand what it completely is.
Yeah.
So it's better just to reproduce then. That's basically saying, well, it's better just to keep getting money or keep my job until I figure it out. Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's this next state of consciousness, which is the mother. That's Leb. That's all the compassion. That's all of ever will be on physical realities. And that's also the nourishment that you have to give to others and that you need from others. So all that component is there. And then there's the jackal. Now, here's the other thing. The Nomo, if you want to also understand their personification, especially as a rainbow serpent, were by some painted as dreadful beings, while others painted as the most glorious things. Why? It's because they contain both.
Both.
That's the whole thing. So it's almost like if you can't see the forest for the trees, if you can't see that this being is a twin or an androgen, and right off the bat interpret that, oh, that means it has a good and a bad side, or what we would call good and bad, then
Right.
you can't actually crack into the mysteries, because you'll notice that this being was actually punishing some beings for their mistakes while nourishing other beings that were still in a childlike phase at the same time. And everyone was painting about it. So someone was painting about this terrible lizard is destroying us, like George and the rest of the people in Ireland, and we need to get rid of this, and we need to, get it off of us. And this is because they were in the Yaldabaoth phase. They are in that lion snake phase of the sun. Same thing with how they draw their symbols. They put the lion on there, but he's standing up, right? When on their crest, they put this standing up lion. And that's because they know their father. Just like even in the ancient Nubian traditions and even in the ancient Dogon traditions, they know their father was the jackal, and that their father was the embodiment of evil. Like everyone knew that, okay, because the jackal is basically created from a word, it's got screwed up DNA, and really won't be the same until he reunites with the mother, that this is a metaphor for what's going on inside of us. And that's why we're so conflicted. And until we bring the jackal in ourselves, the negative side of ourselves per se, into balance with its mother, and then into the extraterrestrial state of consciousness, meaning outside of the box, then we can never be perfected again, because our DNA will consistently keep breaking and keep shattering, okay? So it's important to do an introspection, outrospection on this, because you'll see people acting this out on the physical level. You'll definitely see a lot of jackals running around, because the human composite became, meaning how the human is developed, this particular body, gives you the secret, which I'm not sure if you've heard it or not, but Yaqub on the island of Patmos. Now, Yaqub on the island of Patmos is actually the story that Elijah Muhammad brought to create what's called now the Nation of Islam. And this story went that this being known as Yaqub, this man known as the double-brain Yaqub, Yaqub is the Arabic for Jacob, why Jacob is also the word James, and James is the word Jack, okay? So double-brain Yaqub on the island of Patmos decided that he was going to create two, okay? Like now this being that I'm telling you about that was created from the word decides, why don't I create? So this is also what gives you the Cain story, because as I told you before, that this being is a smith, and smith is also Tubal Cain. That's how it starts tying all in. But that this being decides, well, let me create something, let me make something, and it decides to make what we're calling man today. I believe what it's really showing is that it created what we're calling a white person today from Canaan. And this is because this being wanted to actually create a being that didn't have as much compassion as these darker beings, because these darker beings had more of a connection with Leb, because Leb was the one who was basically the female goddess that was creating all of these, what we're calling Indians and what we're calling dark-faced Dravidians and what we're calling even black people, that she was creating that. So Jackal thinks, well, shit, all I need to do is invert this and create something white on an opposite spectrum, and then it'll go to war with hers. You see what I mean? And that's what it did. So this is what the genetic modification was, is that it used the same composites of the races that were already here, and then it blended those races together, but it blended out the gene of melanin, which is basically the connection to the sun, which is female.
Right.
So what happened is that through this process does comes forth another being on the planet that is a lot more callous than the other beings that live on the planet. And so this is what is called the master race. Not a master race in the sense that this race is the master and greater than everyone, but a master race in the sense that it was a race created to master over everyone else, the same way a human attempts to master over a dog, or a human attempts to master over other animals, or a human attempts to even master over other humans. You see what I mean? So
Yes.
this creates more confusion. Now, if you want to understand this from space, just meaning some space, let's clear this out here. All of this is a process of fire and water. Each time different components are being used to create more of this reproduction, so more diversity can take place, so that all of the genes that can't survive, like jealousy, hatred, because with all that, you actually won't survive over a certain period of time. You can't go into a certain wavelength. That all of that would eventually burn off or boil off, because the beings would just get wisen up. They would get tired of doing it. And that's why Sophia was associated with fire, because when you get wisdom, you start to burn off the foolishness. It's like, okay, well, I don't care who color it is and what's going on and whose problem it is. What are we going to get to? Let's get to the solutions. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to end this first part of the conversation, which is about kind of the ancestral history of what's been taking place on the planet and the different warring factions, the 8 ancestors, which is another part that I didn't actually get to, but I will close down with it, that once all this stuff starts happening on Earth, there were elders here that were still involved in witnessing it, and also involved in helping certain beings and not helping other beings and trying to make decisions. So all this confusion was dragging everyone into it, is what I'm telling you. So it didn't matter how advanced of a being you were. If you had a child that was still in a squabble with another part of your genus, or something basically that was created on the 4th word rather than the 2nd word, you still were stressed out about it. Do you see? In this, so what happened was that when the ancestors attempted to go back to their planet, which is where the Nomo are from, the Nomo didn't allow them there without them losing their power of reproduction. This is, again, a middle part of the story, but if you would really understand this, this is also why in the Bible, when the angels supposedly made it with man, that they had basically offended God, and they're just giving you a cognate of a real story that's happening, and that the angels did not want God to know that they had done something down here, and they tried to keep it a secret. So it's the same thing with Leb. Leb had these reproductions, mainly the jackal. So you can imagine, if she created the jackal, the last thing she's going to want is her parents to figure out that she created the jackal.
Right.
So she tried to hide it from them, okay? And so during this process of her trying to hide it, and these are now, when I'm saying one person, I'm talking about lots of ancestors, because they're all tied into Sophia. Do you see what I mean? So now that she's trying to hide this creation and trying to basically perfect this creation, and this is why they started mixing good people with the jackal in hopes that they could eventually balance out this energy. And I think that this is what humans are, is that humans are the actual, if you want to call it experiment, project, it's even deeper than that. But to try to balance out these energies by putting them all in the same vehicle and just seeing if it'll work out. But long story short, the Nomo figured out about this, and they were pissed, but they don't get upset. So what they did was is they just didn't allow them to come back to the planet with that kind of power. So this is like almost quasi the same situation that we're dealing with, because we're also talking about a hyperdimensional story here. It's like you have these powers and abilities, and oh my goodness, do you? Like everyone really does have them in some weight or measure, especially the more they perfect themselves. But you're not allowed to use it, okay? And because this is the same thing that happened to the ancestors, because the ancestors, in a sense, would be us. That when they tried to go back to their planet, the Nomen was like, oh no, you forfeited your power. Like you went down there and created. We already told you not to create externally, okay? And so you did that. So if you want to be back here, you're going to be back here, but you're going to start from square one again. And so these ancestors, which were known as the 8 ancestors, this is why there's an 8-pointed star. This is why Haile Selassie wears the 8-pointed star and the Queen of England wears the 8-pointed star. It's not, which was my confusion, that they're in the same club, but then again they are. It's just that they're the 8 lion ancestors that it's like they wear the same star, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily on the same team, you see, because they got their own conflicts and their own wars with each other, because that's obviously what ensued, because they decided, since they couldn't be on their planet with having their powers, that they would just come back to Earth, and they're here now. So on Earth, there are 8 arc families, meaning that they are like, just like that ancient old man over in the Nomo tribe, the last one left that seems to know what's going on. He's one of the ancestors. Why in the Queen Elizabeth is probably one of the ancestors. Why in Japan, the emperor is probably one of the ancestors. Do you see what I mean? So there's 8 of them, and they're still here. They can't leave because every time they die, they just reincarnate in their culture. You see, like all of what people are calling culture, like what makes black people black per se, is our ancestor. And our ancestor is here, but where is he and she? And this becomes, you know, the deeper level of the story. And I'm not sure if we're going to get into this much, but this gets into the netherworld or the netter world. And this gets into when our ancestors, in a sense, decided to go back in time, which we call it going to the future, and try to fix this rather than staying here and just dealing with it as it is. And so when you go back in time anywhere else, and this may get a little confusing, but when you go back in time anywhere else, it's going to be like you're gone. So to us right now, it's like our ancestors are gone. It's like, well, where's our ancient tradition? Our ancient tradition been destroyed, and you know these people have changed our stuff, and that's actually not what's happened. What's happened is it's left to come back inside of us. So if you feel like at times that there is something massive you're doing and something that you're mainly connected to, this is what it's about. It's about that there were some mistakes made, just like you make mistakes right now, just like you make decisions, they lead you to certain things. We call those mistakes, but they're just cause and effect. But sometimes those effects are not what we're looking for, right?
Right.
So imagine that you start making some effects happen that throw off your whole immortality. And now people may not think this is serious right now, but it is every bit as serious, because Sirius is the dog star, but we won't make metaphors here. People, they don't think that the loss of their immortality or even the idea in their mind that they could actually die is not a major issue going on with the DNA. It's because they're asleep, or a major issue going on with your entire existence. If you're no longer immortal, if you can't regenerate and you even think you die, this can't be the height or the level of where you're supposed to be at. And so this is also where there's a lot of healing going on right now. And part of that healing is just basically accepting another story. And whether you want to call that story true or not, I don't think anything is true and I don't think anything is false. But what this story is about is just saying that, hey, this is a part of our whole growing process. We're just seeds, and we're growing back up or growing up to be trees. And at that point, we will experience our full consciousness. That is pretty much the overall story of every movement that's out right now. But the truth is we descended from greatness. So why these people think that, in a certain sense, that we're going to something that we never were, it's actually quite the contrary. We're going back to something that we were. And that's also very important in understanding when you start getting confused about things, especially just on energies and energies that you're feeling inside of yourself, is that to understand, well, wait a minute, the answer to all this is not yet to be revealed. It's already inside of me, and I just need to access it. And so let me give you the technique.
Okay.
As I told you, on the moon, the Overmind is there. Now, the Overmind is like a big soccer ball. Whoever controls it most wins. Okay, that's the only way this thing functions. It functions based on the strongest mind attempting to control it. And so look at the moon inside of you, right? And then understand that there's an overmind there. And what this overmind is very similar to how the internet works. It has answers to everything. And the only thing you need to do is send in the query and then or send in the question. And then it's better to do this in water, like in the shower or whatever. Just start thinking, putting it all together in your mind of what you're asking for, meaning actually create the scene, okay? And then as you're creating the scene, you still just focus directly on what you want to know the answer to. And let me give you an idea of this. Creating this device, because I have to speed this whole process up, because trying to explain this to everyone is going to be quite complex, and you can see why. So there's a way to do this with just a device, if you want to give it that term, and that's why I'm launching Spirit Tech. It's a device of perfection. Basically, it's the energy generator. It's what is inside of what in the moon as far as what gives it power. And the reason why I really want you to start seeing this, and I'm sending the energy now, is because you'll start seeing how your body functions, but more of an intrinsic level, like what the Ayurveda doctors are really doing and how they know so much and how they're able to send their essence. And it's because when you look inside of yourself, and then you look into, let's say, for instance, the moon as your moon, then you know it's a ship. And the reason why it should be always determined as such is because you can now think of the individual pieces that are necessary to have a ship, to have a functional ship. And then that you can actually use each of those individual pieces that are in that ship for what they're really created for. So for instance, in the ship, there's the Overmind. The Overmind is basically like an internet. It contains maps, it contains diagrams, it contains all the answers to whatever you're trying to create. There's nothing new under the sun. Everything's all been done. To access it, you simply go through the Overmind. Now, the Overmind is very interesting because it equals synchronization. You actually will be thinking of a word, and on TV, the same word will be said. Or you'll be reading, and what you're reading about will be repeated somewhere else. And this is because what the Overmind is that everyone that's on the frequency right now of cracking through this and getting ready to expand, we're all having the same thoughts. You see what I mean? But what happens is if you don't know about the Overmind, you'll think that they're just all your thoughts. Actually, they're not yours and they're not mine. They're all of ours. Because the thought is so big, this idea and this manifestation of what we're creating is so big, it takes quantum processors, meaning more than one of us, to actually get done. And you can see that from all levels, right? If just one of us try to do this, forget it. I've already tried it. Took 2 years for me to realize it's not possible, okay? And then so because it's too big of a projection. So this is the same thing as if you try to run Photoshop on a computer from 6 years ago. It's just not even going to start up. It's just going to sit there and it's going to take forever. It's not going to work, right? So that's how you contemplate what this Overmind really is. It's something that you can send your queries into. It's connected to everyone that is on your frequency, because remember, some are also accessing the Overmind on a lower frequency and connecting with others on that low frequency, and they're all having the same thoughts. Okay, so remember, the Overmind is just like a computer. It's not positive or negative. It's just a database. But it's actually like the way you ping, like how they say, oh, it's reflecting the sun. Okay, so who's the sun? You are, not the one in the sky. So if it's reflecting you, then you can reflect off the moon. You can send it something to it that you need to know, and it'll bounce back with the answer. Okay? So because it's just basically, it's a process of how we communicate and what we do on an organic level. Okay? So that's the database. Now, then there's also a power source. And let me let you understand how this power source works. In Nubia, there's pyramids. And you can find them by typing in Nubian pyramids. And obviously, there's way more pyramids in Upper Egypt than there are in Lower Egypt. And these pyramids, though, are a lot smaller because size doesn't matter. It's all about measurements. And what these pyramids do, and they're known as Nubian pyramids, is that they are energy conductors. And this is why the beings basically sit inside of those, like what we call a Merkaba. They just stand inside of these things. And this is their suit. Because right now, like your car, when you want to go somewhere, you jump in a car. okay? And the car is wrapped around you, but you can kind of still get out, right?
Right.
And so it's the same thing with them. What's around them is one of these vehicles because they're way more efficient. When you're traveling through all these consciousness and cosmos, the best shape is like a dart, except for the sides, instead of being straight, are bowed. And this is because as you're speeding, and this is another visualization, as you're speeding through these cosmos, it's best for you to be in this shape because your tip is like a pin. So this means you're going to puncture anything that's trying to keep you out of where you're going, right?
Right.
So, and on top of that, the reason why you don't want your side straight is because once that slips to the left or slips to the right of your dart, if it catches your sides, it's basically going to rub against your sides until it flings off. So it's going to create some turbulence. But if you create what's like a bow from the point of view to a bow, which is the mother symbol, then when you puncture through it, it not only slides right off the side of you, but it also gives you a little force because it whips off of the back of your point. Does that make sense to you? I really want, it's like what the concave triangle looks like as I was explaining. But so if you take your hands, right, and you put them together and by the tips, okay, like the tip of your fingers, and you put them together, and then you push in with, and you'll see you'll see your hands bow, okay? This is the shape of that arrow. And I'm telling you, this is so powerful because it's known that even the smith, who's the jackal, can only travel through space like this. He carries a hammer or a bow. It says he carries, a bow in his hand. And these are all metaphors because it's telling you how these beings travel, and how you can travel through all of this is by forming yourself into a shape that it not only doesn't give you any resistance to what you're going through, but it also allows what you're going through to even give you some propulsion. You see what I mean? Which is a whole different level. It's like now you're actually building yourself off of what would generally be conflicts and turbulence and walls for most people. Okay?
Got it.
And so the next stage of this then is that to realize what the power source consists of is to understand what game is being played here on Earth in every bit of a game. And you can see it in soccer since it's now World Cup time, but it's important to understand what you're looking at when you're looking at a soccer field. Now, first of all, we always have the ball, and we've seen the ball as either pentagons and hexagons, and this year it's a triquera, which is even a more potent symbol. It's like basically a trinity on the soccer ball. But what's important to understand about this game is that this game is functioning on two dualistic poles, okay? But first the energy must be channeled. So let me show you the vision. Imagine, because I don't watch soccer much, but I've seen enough of it now to understand the scope of it. But there's 50 teams or something like that in the beginning, possibly more. They come from every country, okay? And now when the first teams play each other, because everyone has their team, because everyone was born in a specific country or they have a team that they like, they first root for this one team. But generally, most people's team loses. So on that first round. So during the next round, they actually have to pick a new team, a team that they like and that they say, okay, well, my team is out, but I'll still ride with Argentina because at least they're Latin. You see what I mean? So then they pick another team. Now, if you imagine this on an energetic level, what you would see first is this fat wedge pyramid. And now that first round of loss, now the pyramid's smaller because that first layer has now dissolved. And now the only thing that's left from that first layer is the ones who made it beyond, right? So now the second round starts. Same thing happens. The people who had that were winners in the second round, now some of them are losers. But here's what happens with the energy. When you win one time, you get excited. So the letdown is bigger. You see, because if you get canceled in the first round, like the person like, I knew they weren't going to make it anyway. They're sorry. They have a good team. You see what I mean? So they're okay with that because that always happens. But it's when there starts to become hope. So the second round comes, that team loses, so the energetics are higher. So the person's more upset that their team lost. But they're also equally more excited to pick another team. Because what the person's doing is they're channeling energy. Now, I'm just giving this to you in soccer, but this happens in makeup. This happens in cinema. This happens everywhere. I'm just letting you see the power source so you understand the power source that's inside of you. So then what happens is the first wedge, second wedge is gone. Now the third wedge. Let's say there's only 5 wedges so we can end this soon. So now the third wedge, the same thing is going to happen. Now the last game. The last game can be seen as, again, the pyramid, because this is pyramid energetics. The last game is there. So what you have is you have a winning team, or the team, where you have basically the 2 poles. You have either going to be what's the winners and what's going to be the losers, but everyone has decided which one they're riding with, and the game starts. Now, what happens here then is that it doesn't even matter who really wins for the controllers, because they have both pieces of the energy right there, positive and negative. Someone's going to be laughing at the end of the game, and someone's going to be crying. And it happens every time. You can pan. These people are so emotional about the game that every time they lose, they start to really shed tears, and it really affects them, okay? So what I'm saying is the dignity of the process here and the dignity of understanding all the human beings around us is to understand that their expressions are very strong. And that when they send those expressions and they get involved in this kind of things, what they're actually conducting is a mass ritual. And this mass ritual has got so much energy involved in it that those people's energetics are really being used to shape, form, and fashion the overmind. Like what the overmind's going to project next and what we're all going to go into next. So this is why I was saying about, that's why they call it also the craft, or this art of this level of magic that they're using on everyone else to get their energy funneled all into one point. But notice the funneling is important because you have to bring the energy into one point. So you can see this as a cone, or you can see this as a triangle. You can see this as a pyramid. You can see this as concentric circles that are eventually forming into a dot in the center. And all of these are metaphors for all the same thing, which is taking what would be a large amount of energy and then focusing it all into one point. That way it can become effective. So this is also what you should see inside of yourself, is that, yes, indeed, you have a massive level of energy. You connect to more things than you can even really penetrate. Like you can't actually get to the bottom of what it is that's going on with you, because the shape that you're in when trying to comprehend it is too spread out. So when you bring it all in, instead of all having all these external characters and having this other quarrel going on with this other race and, this kind of thing, you bring it all into the center point, right? And then you bring them all onto the field for one final game to show them that they're in this final game. There can only be a winner and a loser. There could never be a tie. Now notice what the tie means. It means to tie things together, to link things together, right?
Right.
So, but in that game, there's no tie. They always make sure that, if you tie it up on the kickoff on the last round, they're going to have another kickoff until someone loses. So this is strange energy dynamics, because if they actually, just with that game alone, let's say how you could really change a world, just with soccer alone, if someone passed the law and said, okay, we're now allowing ties, and then the greatest game that was held for that last 4 years ended in a tie, then everyone would actually walk away from that game balanced. So this is why I'm also saying to you that that's why I have to convert this story that I'm explaining to you today. And I guess other people will hear it because it'll be on a recording, but I will have to convert it into another way of explaining this. But realize that some just see soccer. So you have to be able to, or you don't have to do anything, but you get to be able to show it to them in that way. Why some, they have a different kind of preference, but it's all still the same thing. So let's conclude this by getting back into the energy module. So now imagine one of these huge domes, and they generally look like nests, but if you can imagine one of these huge soccer stadiums, everyone's around it. There's good energy or positive energy. There's negative energy. Both of them are present, and they're completely polarized. Like one team does not like the other team. Some people don't like both of the teams. Most of the time, you very seldom find any of that kind of thing going on. So the two poles are polarized. So imagine yourself pulling off of it, and then you look down on it, and you'll see the generator. You'll see the power supply, because what you've accomplished is you've put you've taken two opposite poles and you've made them come together all in one act, right? And this act for them is called the game. And then now they are utilizing their energies back and forth, back and forth, back and forth to become a generator. But let me show you an even deeper key. Now, what happens is because, first of all, the game itself is tainted. There's beer everywhere. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with beer, but the whole idea here is definitely not to expand. There's a lot of hatred going on, and then there's a lot of overwhelmed emotions, and basically the whole thing is chaos. So what is generally created from this energy is chaotic energy, and that's the only thing that these beings are really trying to focus, the Masons, the Jesuits, etc., focus things into chaotic energy, right? But imagine this. What happens is in a real generator, if you didn't use those kind of components, and let's say you use noble components like crystals. So imagine now a soccer field of crystals, where on one side are all the crystals that are, let's say, in the geometry of 5, while on the other side, there's all the crystals that are geometry of 6. And then you put a magnet in the middle or something to pull them together or attract them together. And then once they're pulled together, now they're going to generate this new energy. But this energy, instead of being like what you see after a soccer game, is going to be entirely different. It's going to be like the difference between using Monsanto's versus using organic food. Because the components are the same, it's still energy dynamics. You're trying to take what is two opposing poles or two things that are diametrically opposed to one another, and you're trying to bring them together. Now, whoever said there was something wrong with that? Isn't that not what we're trying to do here in the world? Right? But there's an important reason of why I'm saying try, because try is a triangle. What the world is attempting to do is use the form of a triangle or the pattern of a triangle to bring everyone together. I just explained it to you in that way, but why it doesn't work. Because of how that system is set up. It's like someone can just come in and say, oh, I see the problem. Why don't you bow your triangle? And then from that, you'll get a totally different result. So this is like as an archer, you're sitting there and your whole thing is archery. And it's like you're trying to get a more precise shot and you're trying to get more velocity on your arrow. And that's just your thing, right? But let's say you keep building these arrows the same way that everyone else is building them. You slight variation, you may put a little different feather on the back, but you never get that, hey, it's the tip that really needs to be changed. And then someone comes along that's a little bit more advanced at archery and says, oh, guess what? A while ago I found out that if you actually bow that tip, it's going to change everything about how you're an archer. So this is also how it is with this simple stuff. And there was a lot of simple stuff talked today, and there was some complex things. But it's just a simple adjustment, a minor adjustment at times that will change everything about what we are. And if we tune more into that versus the stuff that we don't understand at times, we'll find that it's still present there, that we'll actually be able to get ourselves to that next stage of expansion. Like some people do like to hear the whole story because we become very complex beings in the drama. But some others just want to hear it very simple, like tell me in my way that I understand it. And for a soccer player, you can tell it to them just like that, and they'll be like, you'd be surprised the results. The person will first sit down because they like soccer. So you're not even starting off on the wrong foot with them. Literally, you're talking about something that they like. And again, I'm only using a metaphor because this exists in everything. And then you show them the simple dynamics of how all the energy is channeled. It could be even into a brand. You notice how everyone used to use Maybelline first, but then now it's Max Factor. And then you show them how, look. And so it's what it is just tunneling all the energy into one thing. But overall, the person who's controlling it doesn't really care what one you like and which one you don't like. They just want you to make the choice. And then when you make the choice, so notice what I'm saying, they want the person to say, I like that team and I don't like that other team. That's how you actually create a polarization. You see what I mean? So I'm not going to pour any more sauce on that. I'm actually going to take a moment and just hear any kind of statements or any kind of questions that you may have, especially things that are direct.
Right. Wow. First, I just want to say thank you for bringing the clarity.
You're more than welcome, because I did read your message on Facebook. You were like, it's very clear to me, though, what you're expressing, because it's the same thing that I feel. And then it's like, okay, well, that's what we didn't get to cover. Because, sometimes you can say certain things, and that's why I was realizing that you did come on a little strong about the no DNA. Right. But that's when you're not ready to deal. That's when you don't want to deal with this no mo, meaning that no more. When you do that, you won't mate with this construct. You see what I mean?
Gotcha.
So, because you don't, it's like you don't need to mate. And notice
Right.
how there's such deeper metaphors. So it's like you don't actually need the world, because the world is what's giving you, is only giving you the component that you're mating with, right? And here's an
Right.
even deeper way to see it. And I'm glad I was able to say this before we got done with the conversation, because it was a really deep introspection, literally. Understand this. Now, before the sun, before what we're calling a sun, what was here was water. And this is another deep visualization of how to regenerate your body. Okay? And that's why the normal became synonymous with water, because water is always needed to generate the first stage of everything. But here's what's interesting. So there's no sun and there's water. And if you ever conduct the same kind of experiment at your own house, you'll notice within 2 to 3 hours, bacteria starts to replicate in the water that's there, because there's no sun. So, because what the sun does is the sun kills a lot of the bacteria and things that would even replicate initially. Okay? That's why the sun can always take a world into another phase, because it doesn't even allow a certain phase to grow and exist. So
Okay.
they start at night, but by the daytime, early in the morning, they're already dead again, because the sunlight is too strong. It's like what mold is. Like if you put something out and put mold out in direct sunlight, within 4 hours, it's completely gone, because it's completely died. It's transmuted. So now
Right.
imagine before the sun got here, then in this water, that this water was so fertile, and there were so many things reproducing in this water. This water was energy. Okay, that's why water is energy, because there's so many things reproducing in water that you can't even see. It gives you power. It's like you're drinking a very strong probiotic or bacteria of some sort. Okay, but but we're talking about now this water. They've done something to it. It's clear now. This water was very murky. It was like sludge in a sense, because it had so much life in it. But here's the other thing: the life was not devoid of light. And it's the same thing that you witness in the ocean, that all the animals in the ocean that can't be exposed to the sunlight get their own light,
Right.
right? And so just imagine that from a state of consciousness. Instead of you depending on some external light, you have your own light.
Right.
And then the darker it gets, the brighter you shine. And this becomes a part of your entire makeup. Okay, so this is also how we can take these things in nature and realize the true states of ourselves when we can start to get into this deeply. So just remember that this water was there, but the beings, many of them were bioluminescent. And this water was so fertile that even if you put a tip of it on your finger, it would be moving around and all sorts of stuff, because it was alive. And then that's why even the Bible, which is obviously the beginning of the jackal's advent into the planet, it's hovering over the water first. And
Right.
then it brings in light, right? And then light is its seed. And then it puts
Right.
its seed into the water, and then it starts to bring forth what we call humans. So this is what you know, this is how you know Darwin and all those kind of individuals, they know this story, and they're definitely a part of that side that's suppressing this story, obviously. But they show metaphorically the fish walking out of the water. Because what it really is that whole kingdom that is underwater, which is still there. Like that's why there's only 10% of the ocean that's been explored even to date, right? So, and it's because that there is a kingdom there. And then that kingdom is one of the kingdoms that are also affecting consciousness, and I believe also in a very positive level for the emancipation of the species, or the next level of their consciousness, but also that there are some malevolent forces down there too. But all what we would call the real deep stuff is happening in the ocean.
Right.
Because and then how you would know that in conclusion is that even the Crowleyism and all that was formed off of the whole chthonic tradition of the guy who was writing all the Lovecraft. Okay, so all of what the OTO, the Golden Dawn, the Queen of England, John Dee, and all of them formed their knowledge off of a man's knowledge about basically squid face people, or a squid face being that lived deep in the ocean. That was what everyone was calling Satan. Okay, and then so this connects, because if you go in the African tradition, you'll find a deep tradition about mermaids, and that the
Right.
mermaids came from the sea, and this is also what the Little Mermaid was about, and that the mermaids came from the sea, and that there was a king down there though, and there was a king and a queen of the mermaids, mainly that this king and queen was in the same body. And I'm giving you the last part of this metaphor, to understand that there's some beings there. I can't completely give you their entire genus yet and what they're up to, but there's some beings there because this same beings, now here in Costa Rica, there's a mountain called Chiripo, and it's got shells on top. And in Kentucky, there's another large mountain range, and it's got shells on top. So it proves that all of this, again, it was underwater.
Right.
So it's kind of common sense to know that basically anything that was living on land, if there was something living on land at that point, would have been wiped out because the canopy broke, meaning Earth's water broke. So all of the water that's in the sky just fell all around the Earth all at one time. So that's pretty much it for anyone living on the surface, but not beings living in the ocean.
Right.
So this means that these beings, because they're also connected to regeneration, people will want to know, well, everything dies. Not necessarily. Everything that lives on the surface dies. That's what's written in a lot of the books, even scientific books, that it's the sun that's doing this to us. It's what's aging us. So beings that are so deep in the ocean that the sun can't penetrate, which there is many places in the ocean that the sun can't penetrate, they're not dealing with what the degeneration that the sun causes. You see what I mean? So this is why I believe there's a boundary of light. And this is what is also hidden within the traditions of what you see the Jesuits trying to emulate, which is basically that the being that came from the sea would come out at night. And the reason why it would come at night to instruct everyone, and they call her the master of speeches. This is Leb, that she would come out of the water, and that's what the Starbucks symbol is she was come out of the water at night, and then she would instruct men. Now notice how it changed to this male would come out of the water and it would instruct men, but that's not how it happened first. That's how it happened after, when the jackal was created, that he would come out and instruct men from the water because he also had that kind of snake lion body. But initially, the mother was doing it, and she was seen like a mermaid. And the reason why she wouldn't come out in the day is because this being is like a fish. To be out in the daytime, you would basically dry out. And so they're showing you that, and they're saying that most of the characteristics of the female on our planet come from the ocean. The gills and many different things that the woman sees on her body are actually pieces of things that are in the ocean, because she's more of the embodiment of what the ocean is. And of course we know this, but we in a sense don't apply it directly to, hey, this is real. Like there's a being and she's like a female and she's like a fish goddess of some sort. And all the beings that live in the ocean, she's the mother of them, because they did come from somewhere too. You have to give them the dignity of their process. Don't just looking at your own story and not figuring out where all the other creatures come from. You may not figure out where you come from.
Right.
But what happens is when you get their story down pat, then you also see that this is a replication. Like this is something that's continuously being done on different levels. And we're just saying that this is the highest level right now. We're just saying we're the best. But I'm sure if you talk to a dolphin, he's going to be telling you the same thing. He's going to be telling you how he's the best. And
right.
how, he can swim faster and that kind of story. But, it's a little comedy to it. But I believe that it's 100% close to what's really happening. And so, you know what? I didn't mean to not conclude the story with the very, very clear explanation of what changes our planet. And I believe that this is going to happen very soon. And it can happen in you really anytime you want, but on a planetary level. So the jackal gets tired because what happens is, because after crashing the ship, which was what's seen also in the Sumerian text, after crashing the ship into the earth, that's also what created a lot of the schisms and the problems that we're dealing with. But that was also the point of defeat, really, in the jackal's consciousness. That's when the jackal really realized that it was stuck on the planet because it can't drive the ship. Now I realize what happened, and I'm glad I'm talking to you today, because I couldn't think of how the jackal could crash the ship, or how the smith could crash the ship. And the reason why I want you to understand this, even from a perspective of yourself, is imagine you're on the planet, everyone's acting a fool, and then you get this concept in your mind that you could build a spaceship. But then you realize it's too difficult for you to build it, but you realize somebody else has one. So stuff gets so bad that you start thinking, maybe I should just steal the ship. Because after all, it looks like everything's going down the drain. And then you go try to steal the ship, and then all of a sudden you get in it, and then you try to drive it, but you realize you can't, and then you crash it, right? And so let's say you still do make it out of it, which they say that the jackal didn't, that he's still actually inside of the moon, that the moon was like a ship that you get inside of. And it's just like a car. If you crash a car and you're inside of it, you can get trapped inside of it. So their vehicles, because of being more like the body is, he got trapped inside of there. So that's just another part of the story. But what I'm saying is that imagine then, and I'm just collecting the thought here, that after that crash, though, you realize, shit, excuse my language, but I cannot drive the ship even. So imagine this, the lower level of frustration, your only way of getting off, you don't even know how to control. So how could it have been that you didn't know how to control the ship? And I couldn't figure that out, and I just figured it out while I was talking to you. And it's because of what they say about these ships. They're controlled by your consciousness. So if you're actually, like they say the UFO, when they went into the UFO, that there was no module like what we have in an aircraft. There's like no buttons. And after a while of examining it, they realized it's because the pilot controls it through their mind.
Through their mind.
So imagine if the Jackal doesn't have, it's like why, and this is the deepest thing, because it's why, quote unquote, they are trapped. And it's not that they're trapped with the craft, it's because they're trapped in their own body, that they can't, because of their consciousness, fly. It's just like what Dan Winter's saying. They can't get above the speed of light because their consciousness won't allow them to do it. So even if they had the spaceship, which they do, and that could sequester it, like what they did with the Ark of the Covenant in Israel, they still can't use it because it takes the being's mind to be in tune with it. And then if you don't have the mind for it, but you get inside of it and it amplifies what you are, it's only going to basically crash. It's like a computer. It hooks into your mind expecting to get a good operating system, and it gets corrupted, and then it just crashes. So you see the depth of the metaphor. So this also shows you why even being phenomenally powerful is like a genie in a bottle. It's confined to the bottle. That's really what the whole, I believe, the genie in the bottle and all that mythology is really about, because that's definitely connected to the jinn and the Arabian Nights and all that kind of stuff. But the real story is, it's still the Jackal. It's still Anu, because that's who they worship. It's kind of clear. And they even worship Anu under the title Ra. But you can see why it can do anything you need on the planet. Phenomenal cosmic power. But its problem is it can't get beyond the planet. And it's really interesting. So what happens is the good conclusion of the story is, because you can still see, if you're compassionate, you can see the plight of this being. You see what I mean? Like, because you would see it in yourself. You're lost, you're phenomenally powerful, but you can't fly, and he's just all that stuff. Your DNA screwed. Someone won't tell you the story. These folks are playing with you. Okay, the only thing that's going to come from you after that is fury. So you understand the Jackal's problem, right? And that's why they say it's connected with Sirius, because Sirius is the dog star, but it also creates what's called the dog days, which is the days that are hotter. And then they say that the reason why it also connects with the dog as an archetype is because the dog, just like the lion, goes into heat. And during that heat period, it's pretty much blinded. It only can think of reproducing at that point. It can't think of anything else. And I've actually felt that energy too before in the height of one of these moons at times when the energy's not in balance. It happens to people all full moon. They all at the thing on. They don't really care. It's like, okay, that person will do. And it's because there's a blinding to that force, right? So that's what this is about. And that's what I like about this whole next level of what we're going into, because obviously we're going into it. I'm not resisting us going into this next phase of things. I've always been like that initially, so there's no use in stopping it now. But you can see, and I'm just really elaborating on it for the second time to someone in its complete story, as I've heard it from or ingested it myself. But you can see how it contains so many healing components, because every time someone wants to go and beat up on the Jackal, because that's what happens, if they start thinking of the Jackal inside of themselves and start seeing this baby Illuminati, as I call it, going on inside of them, where they're still diametrically opposed to. You've cut somebody out, you've hurt someone before, and there's very few of us, and maybe like 0.5% of us that has not engaged in something like that while on planet Earth. So at that point, where I was saying, where do we draw the line? Meaning that some people will say, well, it's okay to gossip about this person, but not these kind of people. And that's called socialism. That becomes subject to you. It's like, it's okay as long as it's not being done to you, but as long as it's being done to that person that you don't like, then it's not a problem. So then we, in our maturity, we collapse all of those thoughts, and we just like, okay, let me get right to the elements of the thing and see how this goes. So how it goes is the Jackal meets its mother, reunites with its mother, with the Nomo, though. The Nomo must be there, because the Jackal, it was already shown that when the Jackal attempted to deal with his mother again, it hates its mother for this.
Right.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, I can feel that.
Exactly. And you can get that why, and this is kind of like what puzzles us, because we're already, the process is happening within us. That's where it's going to take place first. But it confuses us how they're acting, because we're like, well, shit, why would we want to tear up what we're living on? And how could you keep doing that to somebody like your whole life, and you see these people struggling, you don't got no feelings, you don't got no emotions. And so we can comprehend why it would not be correct to do something like that. But the jackal can't. It doesn't understand that. It needs something that is even more powerful than its own mother to actually fix it, because it needs a fixing. Because, and I believe that what happened was, and this, I'm going to end the conversation here, is that what Sophia or Leb did was she used a word that was from somewhere else. Like, this must have been a Nomo word. You see what I mean? Because if you really think about it, because obviously what ensued after that, she didn't even know how to control or how to deal with, right? So that means that she was in possession of something that probably belonged to, in this sense, let's say it was Ra. And let's not mate Ra with the jackal, because I was thinking about that before, and that may not be completely connect properly, but the Ra may be connected more to Leb. But just understanding it as it is, that it's possible that just like what you see in the story of Isis and Ra, and in many other stories where this name is transferred and given to people who don't even, like with the MEs, that they don't even know what they're really dealing with.
Right.
And I think that that's what Pandora's box really means, is that that box of Pandora, which is probably her womb, that she created with this word, and then it just got out of control. Right. And she's still here managing it, like what she says, Sophia is in the dream, and she's living the dream, and she's trying to manage her children and trying to bring it all into balance, but definitely could use some real assistance here in the garden, because there's a lot of beings that are just coming in and out of this thing, and you see it, it's massive. And so to get kind of directly involved in it is what I'm saying. It's like, instead of seeing it as a story, and that's really what I was attempting to convey to people most that last Sunday, is like, look, I'm deeply involved in this. It's been going on for a long time, like it's been years now, and I've seen so many things, and I've just been forced to, at times, especially during certain shows where we're going through what I still see as basics, to just kind of go back to third grade again and start giving you, that all the selves is highest maximum, you need to clean out your system. And it's like, you can do that for years even, which I've been doing, and then, just be available for that. But then all of a sudden your number gets called, and that's what happened 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, I got upset about something, like I was playing at first. Like, I actually had gotten really mad for a moment, and then I was just like, okay, let me just simulate anger, because I feel like that this person needs to see that I can get angry, since they're already seeing all the time that I'm basically not, how that goes, right? They start playing. So I was like, well, look, you need to understand where I'm coming from or where I've been. And so I started getting angry, but I was playing with it because I can simulate. But all of a sudden, it got linked into my Kundalini, and then I couldn't stop it. And I just started getting so angry, and it just started getting so strong, and then it was just overwhelming. And then I was trying to calm myself down, but I couldn't even think. And it just got way out of control. I ended up basically going into this corner and like holding myself down with my own muscles. And if that makes any sense.
It does.
And then once I calmed down and I leveled myself out, oh my goodness, I was in shambles, because I was like, it's almost like when you're being a saint all day and then you see you're the devil.
Yeah.
So it was like, oh my goodness, what was that about? And then I started realizing that, oh my goodness, I haven't been actually taking care of my spiritual being inside, and that it's kind of frustrated with third grade. And it's like, it's agreed. And I think that this is what the jackal side of us is that it's agreed to build something new, and that it's a smith, but it wants to really do something, and it doesn't want to play around, because if it's going to play around, it'd just rather go back to what it was doing before. You see what I mean? Because it's still serious. You know what I mean? Like, meaning it still has that heat, that fire, that passion to make stuff happen. You just have to channel that energy into what is actually going to bring things into balance, because the damage that has been done already by this same being, this is the jackal that's inside of you, is immense, meaning that how many ripple effects that it's actually caused in our lives, your life, whoever is talking and speaking relative to themselves, is immense. So it's still something that's going to have to be rectified and cleaned up, whether we're all hot and pissed off and don't want to do it or not. And so the best thing is to get this being to work in conjunction, to use its strength to fix what is caused here. And this is also the biggest revelation that had come recently about understanding that all these planets, all these beings, these animals, whatever you want to call it, have two sides. So if you want to look at the bad side, then that could just be your thing. And that's what I was telling myself. Like, if you want to just look at the bad side of this all the time, then that could just be your thing. But don't get fooled to believe that there's only a bad side to Saturn and there's only a bad side to Venus. And because nothing is created like that. So once you start doing that, then you're only going to put yourself into further confusion. And so, and then I was also saying, like I have on my Skype, you don't want to get caught up in the way you want people to be, because, you know, that's a dangerous game to start playing, because you end up becoming the Illuminati, because you're basically saying that everything's supposed to be the same way, and nothing in nature shows you that that's how it works. And if you think you're smarter than nature, you know, now you're in the confusion again. You're back with the jackal again, because if you think about it, some stuff is born with no arms, some stuff has some arms, some stuff has one eye, some stuff has 10 eyes, and to us, more is better. So this 10-eye being should be greater than this one-eye being, and definitely somebody with some arms should be better with beings that don't have arms. And so that's us, though. That's what we do. That's all the drama we're going through. Nature, it just takes what is dished out, and it lives.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like, okay, I got this body, there's a longer nose. Cool. Last time I didn't get the long nose. But it's like that. But I also, you know, I was saying, you know, when you get caught up in the way you want people or things to be, but because you'll miss how they really are. And I meant that some people would take that kind of in a negative way and say, well, yeah, that's right, because people are really, really screwed up. And if I don't start seeing that they are, then I'm going to always be abused by them. But that's only one aspect of it. The other aspect is that if you fail to see what people really are, and you're always, or beings and other animals and things really are, and you're always putting your interpretation over it, your label on it, or what you wish it to be. I want the serpent to be the enemy, and I want the koala bear to be the nice one, and I want green to be the favorite color for everything, and I want black to be the evil color. And it's like, so basically when you start doing that, you're missing how things really are. Black is black, white is white, green is green, and these stand for something. Just like we stand for something, right? And so if you understand what it really stands for, then you probably will know its proper place in your tool cabinet, rather than identifying it as something that is really not, putting it in the wrong place, and then trying to use it in the wrong text that it has to be introduced in. And so we line them all up, and I'll say this, and I believe that this was, well, the information shows it was the original Trinity. It was the Nomo, the extraterrestrial state of consciousness, always leaves you a way out of the box. If you think that something is more vast and more massive than even what you've comprehended right now, you're right. You can shift into the normal state of consciousness and begin figuring out how you're going to tap into whatever that is. As far as the work that needs to be done here, and all the compassion and all the cleaning up of what we've done, it's like the end of the party. You're not just going to leave. You now got to clean up the place. All the thoughts and the ideas that you've had and the things that you've sent out there, you're going to have to attend to, right, as a gardener. So that's Leb. Because she's in here with us, right? Like, think about what the mother's going through. I mean, jeez. You know what I mean? Like, she's got mother and father inside of her, but it's constant work. It's like what I see my wife doing all the time. She's just like constantly like, and, you know, even sometimes you got to take care of me, and I'll be like trying to get my attention, and the baby is trying to get her attention, and then we need to eat, and then the ball gets dropped. Like, did you call this person? And then, but I'm still, I'm empathic enough to see it from her eyes, like, man, this is a lot to do, but it's just a different job.
Right.
Because the jackal will tell you edgewise. The jackal will say, well, shit, I created the world. And that, everything that you're using and you're seeing and what you're doing belongs to me. And I need some respect, because here's the other thing I was realizing, and it's a really deep story. Like, the jackal is so into itself that it needs, every time that it makes a move, for someone to actually say, nice one, jackal. We're loving it. Like, we're loving this experience. And it's like when you create something and you create it with ego, because then you're looking for, after it's created, you unveil it, ta-da, and then you're just waiting on people to say, oh, it's wonderful, oh, it's beautiful. But then that person that says, this is full of shit, that's when you're ready to smoke them and you're ready to destroy them utterly. And it's like, well, they don't, and you watch these in your consciousness, and you're like, okay, now it's all time for you beings to come together. And I believe that that's what that whole triquera thing on the soccer ball is. Because remember, they only are working with the same energies that are present. They're just trying to steer it at that last moment. So what they're showing you is, in this world cup or world chalice, is that now the 3-strand connection of the DNA is possible, meaning there could be a bridging between you and all these conflictive forces. However, the message they want to send, especially because they have to bring Germany is the Gothic god, and so of course they're going to stick it to Argentina. If you have money, you can bet on it, but who's betting? But the reality is that they're going to want to shift all the energy into their pole and still leave everyone in that confusion and that disarray until 4 years from now.
Right.
And so this is a big thing, because once we start understanding this truly, we see it everywhere, but most importantly, we see it in us. And then
Right.
when we start weaning it out, when we won't allow our consciousness to be any kind of station or waypoint for any conflictive or unbalanced thoughts and ideas, we just send them away. Now, I'm creating devices that do that, but I'm also telling everyone it's not contingent upon you getting something to do this. You can accomplish it within yourself, but it's also not a taboo for us to create something that does that, which is the other opposing force. They'd be like, well, you can't create anything to emulate God's work.
Yeah.
So basically, I can't create anything to emulate my own work.
Wow.
I mean, I don't even. If I design an actual perfected body out of another device that looks better than me, I can't do that. You know, it's just like it doesn't make any sense. So that's what this is about. So you have all the keys, Tandra. You have the generator, you have the Overmind, you have the ancestor story, and they're you know, they love the drama. So they're still here, like I said. So it's interesting because I'll tell you this. The reason why most people don't talk to them will be the same reason why when you get on a certain level, you won't be able to talk to everyone. And it's because when you communicate with someone that is not on your frequency, they're going to misunderstand you.
Right.
So, and this is a real thing. Like where the ancestors do, they're not going to come down. Could you imagine a supreme being, let's say, wanting to come back in a duality? It just, you know what I mean? And that's why some people say something's got to be going on, because I can't be the only one that ever woke up or ever tried to get into a higher state of spiritual consciousness. There must be something that when a person gets into a high spiritual consciousness that they find out that kind of prevents them from coming back to trying to get everyone else into a higher state of consciousness. Indeed. You know what it is? What it is the same thing that they figured out in the Eastern tradition. Every action causes a reaction.
Right.
Every word you speak causes a wave. And because of the name of the Supreme Being is unmovable, meaning no waves, no tones, no sounds, the ones who are basically the most aggressive at uniting themselves back to no-mo state of consciousness, I mean, I don't want no more of this, are actually in caves somewhere. Exactly, because they know they're not, like, even if you ask them something, they won't say anything. So could you also imagine why we would never really get any knowledge from them? Like, not knowledge how we get knowledge, right? So this answers our riddle, like, because we're always wondering, well, why somebody just need to write a book, man? Write a book about it, man, how you got into a higher state of consciousness, man, and then send it to us. That's an action, just like I did. I wrote a book about me reaching a certain state of consciousness, and the reaction has been all this 5 years of dealing with the platform. I mean, it's been amazing for me. But when you're talking about you don't want no more, this is not it. This is the opposite direction of that. This is when, you know, you're going to get people calling you. You're going to get doing emails. You're going to get, that's not what a monk wants to do. You see what I mean? They want to do opposite to that. So what I also believe, though, is that because I'm not completely in the monk state of consciousness, I have part monk in me, but I also like to be in action. It's just like I wrote that you can merge these beings. The one who just wants to retreat away from everything, which is really like the no-mo state of consciousness, is unmovable. The jackal who really wants to be at the club every night with Rick Ross. And then the mother who's just constantly like cleaning up the messes. It's like, oh no, another one of them is sick again. So, so I think that within that, Tandra, like all of those, I mean, it's like now you've surrounded the characters, right? And I believe that this is why, like, who cares if this is true or not is what I'm saying. Now we have something, and I know it's true personally because you can see it in nature, but let's say, for instance, it's not true in a tense, but it's usable, meaning that with this, you can corner literally every state of consciousness that you may have that's trying to run off somewhere. Right? And because that's always like the jackal wants to run off, the nomo wants to run off, and the mother wants to run off. None of them want to really deal with each other. So, and then, but there's no consciousnesses outside of that. And that's what's also interesting. So when you bring all them together, you won't get this other being popping up talking about, well, what about me? I'm Ozymandias, and here's my story. And you're like, no, that's not your story. That's the jackal. Like, that's the jackal story. And then the mother that always comes with compassionate, she separates herself from everything. She wants a lot of love and a lot of attention. And then, you know, you get characters in the world that actually try to do that to you. And you be like, oh, no, you're just the mother. Like, you're not really anything separate from this. And so you get a chance to keep all these forces within. Also explain every time you encounter one of these forces, because I'm sure you've run into the mother before, even
Yes.
on a physical level, like especially with older women, and when they've dealt with the spirituality and things their whole lives, they tend to take that, and then they also take that burden, and then you see them there, and it's just like, and they're doing the mother, so you feel that whole compassion. But imagine enlightening the mother about the no-mo, because she
Right.
knows about the jackal. And that's
Right.
the thing, because each of these beings know about one of the other beings adjacent to them, but they don't know about that other being. And this is why they say how the DNA was separated, is that the jackal knows about the mother, but he doesn't know about the no-mo.
No more.
You see what I mean? Because he can't even connect to that. Why,
Right.
and the mother, she knows about the jackal, but she needs more of a she needs the no-mo's attention, really. You know what I mean? So it's like, actually, excuse me. I actually mixed that one wrong, but it even shows when it mixes itself wrong. Actually, the mother knows about the no-mo because that's her parents,
Right.
but it's the jackal that she's trying to get that connection back with, right? It's her child. You
Right.
see what I mean? And so you see that because a mother is not going to abandon her child.
Abandon her child.
See, so that's just,
Whew.
it rolls on itself. So I obviously recorded this, so you'll be able to get back to it and to look into it. I hope it recorded. This thing's so potent, I may turn the tape on and just. But I'm gonna just keep transmitting it. But yeah, so
Wow.
wow,
I needed this.
wow, I did too.
Yeah.
I did, because I explained this yesterday briefly to my friend, and it did come out very beautiful. But each time it just gets, because I was still stuck on why the jackal crashed the ship. Because I'm like, damn, jackal. Because, I was thinking myself, because that's why I was able to identify the personality, because I see the etymology and all that stuff. But I was at one point, I was like, man, maybe I should just pursue something else, like being a janitor at NASA, get a little bit closer to one of those ships, really study my thing like they did in the movie Gattaca. And then one day just stow away on board with one of the things, when one of the astronaut suits that I done knocked out, he's in the bathroom, and and I'm on the ship, and then take it from there. And then, so I was thinking, like, basically, of being so as intelligent as Smith, how the hell could he not have already figured out that he was going to need to fly this ship?
To fly the
And then,
ship.
look, man, it's so crazy, because I even have an inside perspective of when Dr. York was in the car with one of the other leaders of the community, and this was just something one of the brothers from the community told me, and Dr. York was driving really fast, and then the dude was like, hey, man, you're going to crash. And then Dr. York, who always was being possessed by something, said, oh, so what are you saying? You think I drive ships? I'm not going to crash the ship? And then so it was even like just that. And then that person was telling me that story, and it's just random. And it's like years ago. You don't even know what it connects to. But then if you can keep your consciousness together and remember all those points, you get into later on, you're like, because, yeah, he embodied the jackal. That's what happened when he built the pyramids out in Eaton in Georgia. I'm not sure if you're aware of Dr. York's work, but and obviously he went crazy after that. Like, he literally became a child molester and very abusive. Like, same thing that you see within the Jesuit tradition, because they did the same thing. They basically went through the Nubian rites and attempted to reincarnate themselves through the dog. And then they came back as Canaanites from the land of Canaan, like Canaans, like carnivores, eating meat, eating flesh, and being in the low frequencies. And that was it. And so, again, the evolution of that being has only become that instead of eating flesh all the time, it eats lower frequencies. And that's what these games and things that are about that we're seeing now, is that, because that person that doesn't, that loses, is going to get ate up. You know what I mean? It's like anytime you're in a very low frequency for too long, you get sick.
Right.
Things start to really gang up on you in a sense. All of a sudden, you have a disagreement with 2-3 people at one time. It's like, well, what y'all ganging up on me? And that's the thing. So, yeah, Tandra. So, is there anything that you can think of that maybe wasn't covered in the conversation at this point for yourself?
Oh, you covered everything. Now I'm just wondering. So, the no has to come. That awareness has to be brought forth to tame the jackal.
Well, I mean, remember, each piece oscillates on itself, and what happens is and you can see the easiest thing to do is like set it out like, okay, if you're dealing with the jackal part of yourself, then you also see where the nomo was going to come in and where the mother was going to come in to deal with that situation. And then when you spin that cube, let's say, for instance, or spin that pyramid, then you see the mother, and then you see what she needs from the jackal side of yourself, and then you see where she needs to also reconnect with the nomo or her parents.
Okay.
You see what I mean? And then when you spin it again and you spin to the nomo is like your ejector seat. Like when you just, all this handling and tilling the garden, basically you're being a guardian. of the planet and its custodian doing that, which is basically with the mother and her child, then you can, when you take the nomo consciousness, that's what you can say. You can say, basically, I'm dealing with the mother and her child. So do you see how when you rise into that consciousness is much more vast. It's like now you've even put the mother into like you've encompassed the mother.
Right.
Intense. And the other thing about the mothers is that it's important to remember that Leb was androgen, and
Right.
she is the rainbow serpent. So she does have a side to her that was deemed by others as, she's just off the chain. Like, you dealing with her. Like, at certain times, she becomes some of the principles of what makes materialism so aggressive at times. You see what I mean? So, and then remember, the sun was endowed with more of that because that's her masculine side. So if she's primarily female but partially male, that material side of her is really the male side, while her son is more male than he is actually female. So he's more material than he is actually spiritual, and that's why he only has a connection with material things and has a hard time connecting with spiritual things. So this triangulation, which we kind of discussed maybe months ago, about how you kind of try and get your mind, body, and soul. So you're going to take that same mind, body, soul template and make it Nomo, Jackal, Mother, and then see within yourself, well, which one is really more prevalent? Which one can I more recognize? And for me, just at this stage, personally, I recognize all of them because I was going through all this before I got the story. Like we did the universal mother. Remember the whole universal mother thing? Most of the time you find me just crying and explaining all the stuff that's going on Earth and how the negative masculine has got to cease and all that, right? And then at one point it was all normal. Like, you were getting stuff from parsecs away from the planet. It was very hard to relate of what was even being explained to this planet as far as it being a possibility of something that we were going to get into. But then, especially in the beginning, the Jackal was most present, which is very dualistic character, very pissed off, is ready to kick God's ass, but doesn't even realize that it is God. You see what I mean? There's so much confusion with the Jackal. It's like it thinks God is separate, and it wants to. You shall have no other gods before me. Well, shit. So you're not going to come before yourself. Right. You see, because that's what you will really be saying when you would be talking to more graduated beings who really knew the whole thing. And this is also another key point, Tandra, remembering that there is a great need for individuals who realize how this is working outwardly and inwardly. And it's because you have a lot of individuals and that are teaching spiritual consciousness that are polarized into one of these characters. It's always going to be one of them. Either you're going to see a Nomo, or you're going to see Mother, or you're going to see the Jackal. Most of the time, you're going to see the Jackal because the Jackal is very tricky. Like, it has a way of tying itself into all the religions and things, right? So what happens is that being always goes and hates the reptilians. I'm going to tell you the common motif of the Jackal is it hates itself. So the first thing that it does is it alienates itself of what it becomes, and that's what is it. And this is the same story of Hitler. Hitler was a Jew, but hated Jews the most. The Jackal is a snake, but hates the snake, okay? So anytime it does a documentary, anytime it does this Jackal state of consciousness, anytime it writes a book, anytime it gets any kind of public forum to speak about something, it always talks against the snake because the snake is the mother.
Okay.
She's the sheath. She's the one that's covering everything. She's the one that's enveloped everything. She's the rainbow snake. She's the one that created things. So the real creator. So this being the Jackal's only interested in basically debasing his mother, which is what's going on with the planet, destruction of the planet and all this kind of thing, elevating itself off that destruction. I can do better. The deuce or the divas that created the diva that created the planet, I'm better than her because I can create with one more DNA, and then it's in a failed experiment of doing that. So do you see all of that whole kind of conflict within that being? And then that being most prevalent within speakers, because the Jackal was also known as one of the masters of speech, meaning that the Jackal is very eloquent with speech. The Jackal likes to talk and likes to do philosophy, rhetoric. Those kind of things are all Jackal playland. Okay? And so what happens is that this being has to express itself through conversation. So it feels comfortable in those kind of atmospheres. Why? It doesn't feel comfortable in the whole empathic, let's sit down, let's meditate, let's feel nature, because it can't feel anything. You see what I mean? So it doesn't want to actually engage in those kind of practices. So this is when you find spiritual leaders that they talk a lot, but they don't do any kind of meditations. They don't do anything really with their diets. They don't do anything really with the earth, but they'll do a lot with paperwork. They'll always try to do some legal stuff. They're always trying to file some papers and petitions. They're always trying to cause some kind of conflict and maybe a little bit of war, because that's all the jackal. You see what I mean? So this is where the jackal obviously is not the first stage that most spiritual teachers start in. It is the stage that they begin in. You see what I mean? It's one of those things that when you're coming out of the world and out of this state of consciousness of the world, you're coming out of the consciousness of the jackal, because the prototype of the world is that being. You see what I mean? Like the world was changed over into that. That's what hundreds of years of Catholicism, hundreds of years of indoctrination and programming, all of that is to make us like it. That's why I said, I'm going to create them in my own image, in my own likeness. I'm going to make them like me. Good and evil, because that's what God said. I'm good and evil. And so this is now humans. We got bad side and good side. We got all these conflicts. We got all this confusion, and it all comes from one being. And so when a person is teaching spirituality because they've learned from Buddhism, remember what I told you, Buddhism would not be possible for Buddha, because Buddha would know to actually reach Atma, you would need to not tell anyone anything. Because you cannot send out a wave if you're going to reach Atma. You can't engage. You can't have disciples. You can't do any of that. So it shows Buddha is not really Buddha. Buddha is the jackal. He's just in Buddha clothes this time. Like he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. He does it all the time. You see what I mean? So, and this again, this is not so non-relative to us. It's good to see another being doing it, but when we watch ourselves doing it, it doesn't become so funny. But when you see that, oh, okay, like sometimes I will take on a garb of namaste, love and light, that I'm really neutral, but inside that's not how I feel. I really want to hurt these folks about doing other things to people, and I really got something else that I'm trying to really accomplish here, but I don't necessarily need to let everyone know that. That's the jackal side of us. It's sneaky. You see what I mean? It's got an agenda, and that agenda generally involves some kind of conflict. It just needs to position itself better so that it can actually win that conflict once it engages in it, right? So this is just the key thing of, and then seeing that the leaders then, and that's why I like the Dogum, because they show how they even got caught up in it, because they actually embodied the jackal. That's why it's called Dogon. Remember, the dog or the dog is the jackal, and that's why God backwards is dog, because that's the being. And so but they knew it always as the negative principle, and that's why, remember, there's not just one. It wasn't just one elder there were several elders, and they say that the ones that served the jackal were with the dog face cult, which was basically became the Jesuits later on, had such destructive magic that even the Nords, who were just learning their druidic traditions, were going to get their spells from the Nubians. And that's where the first trading was. The trading was spells. Now notice, what are they saying? The trading was words. The trading was symbols. Like, so if someone needs to know something about knowledge and all this massiveness, you wouldn't have a conversation with them about it. You would give them a symbol, and they would know what to do with it. They would just have to meditate on the symbol, and then the symbol would reveal everything to them. And so the ones who had already figured out how to get into the distortion and get into malevolence had symbols that represent distortion and malevolence. And when those who wanted to practice that came to them, they would bind them by that symbol and then give them that symbol, and then they would then represent that priestcraft. And so that's why they were saying that this priestcraft of the dog, which later on became Atlantean traditions, Hermes, Thoth, all those traditions, mainly Anubis, but all those traditions were all a part of the same cult, which was basically something that everyone that was involved needed to keep a secret about, because it was about working magic against each other. You see what I mean? And then you can also see how this works in a deeper level, because it's also when a person, let's say they want to face an opponent, and they know that they may not win against that opponent, they'll try to enlist one of these warlocks or basically priests to curse their opponent. And you even see this in the Bible, that a prophet or sorcerer, Balaam, that's the story of Balaam and Balak. Balaam is enlisted to cast a spell on the Israelites by the king of, I believe, Moab. But it's just giving you a metaphor again that some people are so serious about winning, they'll consult deities about whether they're going to win or not. And if it seems like they're not, then they'll try to enlist other entities and deities to allow them to win the battle. And so that's that spell, that's sorceries. So those sorceries, that was like it's like today as it was a job back then. You see what I mean? It's like if you were a sorcerer, you can cast spells, then you would be enlisted by people who had conflicts with other people and wanted to pay those people back. And you still see that in the tradition of in the voodoo. That's really the encompassing of the voodoo, is to use other entities to overcome or mount other entities. So,
Right.
it's just, it's just more clear like this. And then once we get it clear, then we say, oh, okay, we learn how we can cease to engage in certain things and cease to become host to certain things. And it's not going to take any time. And that's why I'm going to be excited to hear you in 2 weeks, a week, maybe even shorter than that, as the transformation takes place completely. Because once you get all these people in their right areas in your body, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get rid of anything. The jackal obviously shows itself as immortal. So does the Nomo, so does Lieb, because these are archetypes. And this is what Jung was saying, that these are symbols, even that if you see somewhere, it'll trigger you into a whole nother state of consciousness. So it's better, and you'll see these symbols in your dream. You'll see different animal in your dream, and then that will do volumes for you. And this is why they say, like, for instance, if you dream of yourself locked in a small room, that's only a room, that's only you in a room that's locked and it's small. But what will that do for your consciousness? It's going to, like, terrify you when you wake up. You're like, I was in this room and it was small, but it's only a room. So they show you that if you're in a dream and then you see this animal, let's say a lion, and it just walks up to you and it sits next to you, it's going to have a whole nother level of things that it's going to do to your consciousness than if something like that happened in the physical reality. You see, I mean, just you're at the zoo and you see this lion there next to you. It's not going to mean the same thing as if you're in your dream and you see that lion there next to you. And so, this is just the depth of the archetype or the arc symbols. When you see them, they're able to, in a sense, give you volumes of information and allow you to remember things that happen even before time. So instead of, in a sense, and I guess this brings us full circle in the conversation, erasing the program, what we're really doing is actually eliminating what part of it is only a program. And then what should be remaining, or what is going to remain, is the truth to the entire thing.
I get it now.